2 minutes. 120 seconds is all it took for one of the most recognizable figures on the planet to silently broadcast a complete physiological meltdown on international television without uttering a single controversial word. He sat down in Jordan to discuss a massive global humanitarian crisis, holding a massive platform that activists would absolutely dream of having. But before his mouth even opened, his body confessed a truth so incredibly uncomfortable that once you see these hidden footage details, you will never look at a royal interview the exact same way again. What exactly forced his autonomic nervous system into a complete and total retreat right in front of the World Health Organization? The answer is hidden in a series of fraction-of-a-second micro-expressions that public relations teams pray you never notice, and we're going to break down the exact moment his composure shattered, frame by frame. The very first thing you notice in the literal opening frames of this interview is his face, and what you are looking at is not a composed, confident man preparing to address a serious situation, but rather someone who looks like he desperately wants to be anywhere else on Earth. He is looking up, not at the interviewer, not at the camera, but up at the ceiling, almost as if the acoustic tiles hold some magical escape route he desperately needs to find before the questions begin. But hold on, because the eye movement is just the beginning of a much deeper physiological domino effect. Then, his eyes close, and this is not a normal, conversational blink that clears the dust from your corneas. This is a prolonged, highly deliberate eye closure, which is exactly the kind of physical reaction the human nervous system produces when it is trying to momentarily block out a threatening stimulus. It is as if the brain rapidly decides it needs a fraction of a second completely away from whatever reality is sitting directly in front of it. Right after this heavy blink, he takes an incredibly slow, deep breath and swallows incredibly hard. If you watch closely, his lips are being wetted repeatedly, which experts claim is a classic undeniable anxiety signal where the body rapidly redirects moisture as a self-comfort response when the fight-or-flight mechanism starts kicking into high gear. And his shoulders, they are completely locked up tight. Both of them are pulled up and in, contracted intensely, as if he is physically bracing for an impact that has not even landed yet. Why is this so significant? Because the interviewer at this exact point is simply setting the scene, politely stating that the prince is here because he does not wish to discuss his family or what is happening back in London, but rather he is here strictly for the organization and the global situation. The host has not even asked him a single, solitary question yet, and the prince is already in a full, red alert physiological stress response. You might think he calms down once the parameters are set, but what happens at the 7-second mark actually amplifies the awkwardness to an entirely new level. At 7 seconds in, the camera cuts to a full face shot, and we get what sources might call his ultimate signature expression, the absolute deer-in-headlights stare. It is that incredibly wide, frozen, slightly glazed look that we have unfortunately seen play out on camera many times over the years when the pressure mounts. Both of his shoulders are still heavily contracted and pulled all the way up toward his ears, but now he is looking sharply to his left at the organization's director general, completely ignoring the interviewer who literally just finished speaking directly to him. He is visibly seeking visual reassurance from a friendly face before he even has to formulate a thought. Notice his head position here as well, because it tells a story words cannot. His chin is pulled far back, creating a highly retracted, turtle-like posture. According to behavioral analysts, when we pull our heads backward like that in a seated position, it subconsciously signals a deep desire to retreat. It is a physical withdrawal while sitting perfectly still, meaning the body is loudly communicating what the conscious mind is desperately trying to hide: the intense desire to instantly leave the room. But just when you assume the interview is going to completely derail, a bizarre shift happens at the 16-second mark that completely changes the dynamic of the conversation. At 16 seconds, he makes a highly visible, incredibly deliberate effort to compose his physical form. You can actually see the heavy shoulders finally drop down. He heavily exhales. He nervously wets his lips one more time. It is the physical equivalent of a stage actor actively collecting themselves right before the velvet curtain pulls back. Yet incredibly, he has still not said a single word. He finally begins to speak at 17 seconds, and the very moment his voice breaks the silence, something very telling and repetitive starts to happen. A subtle, rhythmic, back-and-forth rocking motion begins. This is not just bad posture. This is a deeply ingrained self-soothing behavior. It is actually one of the absolute earliest comfort mechanisms human beings develop. Infants do it in their cribs, and highly anxious adults do it under studio lights. When the nervous system desperately needs a steady rhythm to anchor itself under immense pressure, the physical body simply creates one out of thin air. While he is rocking, he is also rapidly bouncing his visual attention between the interviewer and the official seated to his left. He looks left, then forward, then quickly left again. He is still desperately looking for reassurance, still completely unsettled, even as his own words are finally coming out of his mouth. Now, I have to pause right here and add my own personal take, because I actually think there is a genuine, underlying desire in him to help and do good in the world, which makes it almost deeply sympathetic to watch a guy who clearly has a big heart just absolutely buckle under the crushing weight of the moment. It is honestly fascinating to watch. I am no royal courtier, but if your media training team's ultimate goal was to project unwavering, rock-solid global leadership, they might want to consider issuing a full refund for those public speaking lessons. But the body language is only half the puzzle, because if you listen closely to the actual words he chooses, an even larger mystery begins to unravel right before our eyes. The spoken words are actually betraying him just as loudly as his locked shoulders. If you look at the transcript of this incredibly short 2-minute interview, a staggering pattern emerges that is impossible to ignore once you hear it. He says the specific phrase, I think, an astonishing 8 times. 8 times in under 120 seconds. He says, I think having spoken to the director, and then, I think the world's been going on for decades, followed by I think the world should be incredibly grateful, and I think it's important for everybody, and I think the entire world has spoken up. Now, let us be perfectly fair. Saying I think is not inherently a massive red flag on its own. We all use conversational fillers in our daily lives. But when absolutely every single major claim you make on international television is heavily preloaded with, I think, it becomes the verbal equivalent of a massive, non-committal shoulder shrug. It is hedge after hedge after hedge. It is the exact language pattern of someone who fundamentally does not trust their own position, who is critically unsure of the basic facts, and who is frantically building a linguistic escape hatch into every single sentence just in case they are suddenly challenged by the host. And the actual content of those carefully hedged sentences. It is truly something to behold. He is sitting there supposedly talking about one of the most severe, complex humanitarian crises in recent global memory. He is supposed to be talking about critical medical evacuations and massive global supply chain issues for crucial medicine. And yet, his profound, highly anticipated contribution to the global discourse is quite literally the following phrase. There's a lot of stuff in the news. Stuff. Yes, he actually used the highly technical, incredibly nuanced geopolitical term. Stuff. There is a lot of stuff in the news. It has been alleged in the past by royal insiders that he was not exactly the fastest learner in the palace. And while I am certainly not here to pile on the man unfairly, if you were actively writing a comedic script specifically designed to prove that exact rumor true on camera, you would honestly struggle to do a better job than he just effortlessly did for himself. But if you think that vocabulary choice was the lowest point, watch what involuntarily escapes his body right after he delivers that line. Right after he stumbles through the phrase spoken up and there's a lot of stuff in the news, something slips out that he clearly, undeniably did not intend to happen. A laugh. A very brief, completely involuntary, highly nervous laugh. It is just a fraction of a second, but it is unmistakable. It is that awkward exhale chuckle that involuntarily happens when someone loudly says something they immediately sense was entirely wrong for the room, or when the massive gap between the extreme gravity of a situation and the total inadequacy of your own verbal response becomes entirely too large for the brain to hold without some kind of immediate pressure release valve. It is genuinely, profoundly uncomfortable to watch it happen in real time. And then the physical cues continue to escalate as he tries to wrap up his point. Watch exactly what happens when he casually says the phrase and it drops out of the news. He shrugs. Not a small twitch, but a full, heavy, bilateral shoulder shrug. It is the absolute universal human gesture that clearly communicates, well, what can you do? In behavioral analysis, that is called an illustrator, which is a physical gesture that subconsciously amplifies the true spoken meaning behind the words. He is casually describing the tragic disappearance of a massive humanitarian catastrophe from public attention as something that just naturally happens, almost as if he were simply discussing the unpredictability of the weekend weather. His body has told us exactly how much, or perhaps how little, this specific crisis actually weighs on his internal emotional state. Now we finally arrive at the exact moment that experts suggest is the most remarkable detail from a pure, unfiltered body language standpoint. He's sitting there trying desperately to form the words, very real humanitarian catastrophe. It should be a simple phrase for a global advocate, but watch his eyes in this exact micro moment. In less than half a single second, he blinks approximately 7 times. 7 rapid blinks in a fraction of a moment. That intense visual flutter, that rapid, totally involuntary blinking surge, is a heavily documented, scientifically proven anxiety response. Neurologically speaking, blinking is a rapid mental reset for the brain. When the physical blink rate dramatically spikes like that out of nowhere, it is a direct, undeniable signal that the internal cognitive load has massively spiked right along with it. His brain is quite literally under extreme computational strain, just trying to force those specific syllables out of his mouth. For what it is strictly worth, humanitarian catastrophe is admittedly not the absolute easiest phonetic phrase to clearly articulate on live television, but this is a man who grew up highly educated, speaking English in royal courts his entire life. Yet, he is visibly burning massive amounts of mental processing power just to safely reach the period at the end of that one single sentence. At 1 minute and 34 seconds, right after he stumbles through, that has happened and continues.